104. Thank you, Leaf. That will do. She lingered for a few moments. He sighed and told her to manage things as she thought best. She left the room, wreathed in smiles. As the door closed, Dorian put the key in his pocket and looked round the room. His eye fell on a large purple satin coverlet heavily embroidered with gold, a splendid piece of late 17th century Venetian work that his grandfather had found in a convent near Bologna. Yes, that would serve to wrap the dreadful thing in. It had perhaps served often as a pall for the dead. There's a lot of symbolic value to this. Dorian Gray wants to cover his painting, the painting that's deteriorating and getting old in his place as he stays young forever. The painting represents to him a myriad of things: decay, deterioration, the humiliation of looking old in front of people, more than anything, the death of his soul. His soul is in this painting, and as if the painting were taking a toll that his life is supposed to be taking, and he ignores that. So the painting will go through all the negative experiences. The painting also represents the youth lost, and he is not going to lose his youth in real life, but the painting is going to take all of that until death. The painting represents that death. So covering the painting with something here, and I'll repeat the passage. A splendid piece of late 17th century Venetian work that his grandfather had found in a convent near Bologna. Yes, that would serve to wrap the dreadful thing in. It had perhaps served often as a pall for the dead. So now, by using this material that was used to cover the dead, by using this to cover the painting, he's taking death away from his sightings. All of us, and this is something that we can all relate as human beings, we're all going to be born, we're all going to go through life, and we're all going to die. Some of us are very afraid of death. Some of us are not really wanting to take a moment or two to sit here and think, I will die someday. I wonder what happens after I die. Where do I go? Does my spirit live on? We don't know the answers to these questions. So what do? We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. And Dorian Gray, by covering the painting with something that has served as a pall for the dead, he's covering death, putting death out of sight, out of mind. He doesn't want to think about it because he wants to live forever, forever young. So the symbolism of the painting being covered with something that used to cover the dead. There's a lot of symbolic value in this. And it's important that the literature teacher gives insight to the students who are trying to read the novel and understand the novel. Reading the novel is one thing. I know a lot of people that can read really fast. There's something called dynamic reading, leitura dinâmica. In Portuguese, it's called leitura dinâmica. People can read really fast, really, really fast. Do they take in what they're reading? I'm not sure. Some people do, but most people don't when they read too quickly. So the literature teacher will stop you in moments where there is an important passage where there is symbolism, where there is a metaphor that is relevant to the narrative, where perhaps there is an indication of an element of the novel that will help you understand other elements. So, the role of the literature teacher, the role of the literature teacher in reading a book and being accompanied by a literature teacher that will tell you the points to look for. Literary analysis includes understanding what kind of narrative it is, understanding the characters and their roles, understanding symbolism, metaphors, understanding where there are in between the lines elements that wouldn't be so clear for everybody. So, doing literary analysis, you will get all of these different points. As a literature teacher that has been doing this for 22 years, I have a diploma in English and literature in English language. That is my main area of expertise. I also have a Master of Education in English Literacy from the University of Western Sydney. The University of Western Sydney is in Australia, and when I was there for a year, I learned a lot about teaching, about the classroom environment, about how to teach English, not just as a foreign language, as people might think. That's my degree from Brazil, from UFES, Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo. I have a degree from there to teach English as a foreign and second language, and literature in English. My degree from the University of Western Sydney in Australia. I spent a year at that institute, the University of Western Sydney, the Kingswood campus. That's where my place of residence was. I lived in one of the student residences while I was taking this course to get my master's degree. I lived on campus. I observed classes in different high schools, elementary schools, all sorts of different experiences that teachers were providing their students with taught me how to understand what kind of teacher I wanted to be. I learned something about cooperative learning. I learned something about adolescent literature. I learned something about early childhood development, adult education in English. And I also taught at the University of Western Sydney. I was a visiting professor under the supervision of a professor over there. I taught TESOL, teaching English to students of other languages. I taught not English itself, but I taught people methodologies and approaches in the teaching of the English language to other speakers of other languages. And one of the things that I really spent time in was teaching those people. They were native speakers of English. Most of them were Australians. I was teaching them that through total physical response, the audiolingual approach, the communicative approach, the total immersion approach. I taught these students how to engage speakers of other languages. I taught them what kind of techniques they could use with a group in a heterogeneous class where people would be from different backgrounds. As a matter of fact, I believe every class is a heterogeneous class. So the reason why I'm stopping to say this is that what I'm trying to do here with these lectures that I'm preparing and putting online I am using literature as a tool to teach language. Teaching language does not mean that I'm only able to teach ESL and EFL. There are a lot of native speakers who could benefit from learning proper grammar, from learning how to use their sentence patterns correctly. A lot of native speakers make mistakes that are unfor unforgivable, and they don't even realize they're making a mistake because they use that type of language on an everyday basis, and because everybody else thinks it's correct, so they all go with it. By learning through literature, you become a better speller because you read and you look at the words and you get used to seeing the words spelled correctly. You become a better writer because you learn the correct sentence patterns. You learn how to perhaps mimic the way that the sentences are put in classic literature. And you learn the differences between registers. There is a formal register, there is an informal register. And to be able to identify these different registers, that's why you have the literature teacher. When I was teaching Toni Morrison books, I explained to everybody who would come to my channel and listen, who cared to listen. There are times when her characters will use register of a lower vernacular. They will use English that's not proper English. So then somebody might ask me, why do I want to know this? You want to know what not to do. You want to know how to differentiate what's formal speech and what's informal speech, what's a colloquialism and what is the register that's standard for writing and for speaking as well. So I used a lot of examples, and I would stop every time a character would use a register that was of a lower vernacular. Right now, I'm teaching the book The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was published in 1890. So there is no way that we can compare and even draw too many parallels between this type of writing and what Toni Morrison does. Toni Morrison she's an African American who writes literature. Some people put her under a category of African American literature. But you can just look at her as an American literature producer of the best type of art there is. Toni Morrison is my favorite. I'm a bit biased to talk about her because she's my favorite writer of all times. But of course, what I'm trying to say is that literature is not just one thing. People think literature, poetry. No, poetry is one type of literature. There is short stories, novels, plays. There is a myriad of different aspects to literature. What I'm doing here is teaching the book The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and he is part of when you have a syllabus to analyze what you're going to study in British literature. No syllabus would be complete without Oscar Wilde. The Picture of Dorian Gray, Chapter 10, page 104. He shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he had wished to hide the picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence. and the still more poisonous influences that came from his own temperament. The love that he bore him, for it was really love, had nothing in it that was not noble and intellectual. It was not that mere physical admiration of beauty that is born of the senses, and that dies when the senses tire. It was such love as Michelangelo had known, and Montaigne, and Winckelmann, and Shakespeare himself, another Shakespearean reference. Students of the course that I took, my degree from the university in Brazil, Letras Inglês. Letras Inglês is a course where you study to have a license to teach English and literature in the English language. So students, anybody who is watching this right now who has studied or is studying Letras Inglês somewhere will know what I'm talking about. Shakespeare references. Once you study Shakespeare, we had one semester back in the day when I was getting my education in the field. And it wasn't enough, but it really does give you a lot. And by a lot, it's an understatement, because in literature, often enough, Shakespeare is a reference that's very vivid. And here in this Oscar Wilde book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, there are several references to Shakespeare. One of the characters, Sybil Vane, who was the object of Dorian Gray's affection, she played female characters from Shakespearean plays. Earlier in the course of these cycle of online lectures that I'm making, I talked about the symbolic value of that, of Sybil Vane playing these characters. So these Shakespearean references, you will only get them if you have at least some background knowledge in what Shakespearean plays are. And here in this passage, Shakespeare is being cited as a reference for the artistic value of drama and performance is a great deal of Dorian Gray's life. He's performing. He can't really be himself. He can't reveal his secret to the world, so he's forced to perform. So every time Shakespeare is brought up, there is a symbolic value that goes beyond just, oh, Shakespeare, because Oscar Wilde is British, so yeah, okay, he just wrote something about Shakespeare in there. There's no particular reason. No, there is always an underlying cause for these references to be made. And it's very important to remember that Sybil Vane, with that name as well, there's a lot of symbolism in the name Vane, which evokes that word vain from being vain, that derives from the noun vanity. So there's a lot, because who is more perfect a companion for Dorian Gray than somebody who is vain? Somebody whose name is Vane, Sybil Vane. And symbolism is the gray area in literature, because you can ask a different professor in a different country to read the exact same passage, and he or she might find different elements that I haven't thought of, that a different professor hasn't thought of. But all of it is valid. Interpreting the work, reading a book and interpreting what you read, dissecting what's between the lines. This is what you do with real good literature. And one of the things that I have been mocked and ridiculed for is that I talk about good literature. And people are like, have you ever read Harry Potter? Have you ever read 50 Shades of Grey? That's a good book. I just sit there and I either smile and nod, or sometimes if I'm a little bit fired up, I'll have a discussion with a person about it and say, hey, how dare you? How dare you tell me, how dare you tell me that Fifty Shades of Grey is something that I should be interested in? And that's just, as much as it is a personal opinion, I believe that good quality literature is literature that transcends time. Will people be reading 50 Shades of Grey in hundreds of years from now and dissecting everything that's being written in there and really be learning something, absorbing a lot of culture from it? I don't think so. The Picture of Dorian Gray, they will be getting a lot from it. They will be learning the cultural aspects of what it was to live back in those times when this book was published, 1890. There is a lot of cultural value to good literature. There is a lot of there is a lot of value that you won't get from picking up a book at the airport, one of those novels that are written by the dozen that are just about sex, and then what? What do you get from it? So the reason why I talk about classic literature, classic American literature, classic British literature. So the reason why I emphasize that this is what I'm interested in, it's because I see value in it. I see content that I don't see in a lot of those self-help books that people keep waving at me and saying, "Oh, have you read this?" I'm talking about literature. I don't want to bash self-help books here. I think some self-help books are really good, but that they have absolutely nothing to do with a book like The Picture of Dorian Gray or a book like The Flowing River. A lot of people do not agree that Paulo Coelho actually should be in the Brazilian Academy of Letters, Academia Brasileira de Letras. But I have really changed my mind a lot about Paulo Coelho. When my father was alive, he had a lot of Paulo Coelho books, but he never really took Paulo Coelho seriously as somebody who would be writing literature of value. Nowadays, he is a member of Academia Brasileira de Letras. He is worldly well known for his literature, and he has gained a lot more respect. But what I'm trying to say is that there is good literature, there's self-help books, and there are those books that you get at the airport when you're going to fly somewhere, those romance novels about sex. That's absolutely not what I'm doing here. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I have come to the point here where I talked a little bit about the symbolic value, the symbolism of the picture being covered with something that was used to cover the dead, and about the symbolism behind him not wanting to see death. After all, he's going to live forever, and he's going to be young forever. So death is something that he doesn't want to see. He didn't allow Basil to look at the painting, and now he sort of feels a sense of regret for not telling Basil. Basil is the painter. He shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he had wished to hide the picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence, and the still more poisonous influences that came from his own temperament. The love that he bore him, for it was really love, had nothing in it that was not noble and intellectual. It was not that mere physical admiration of beauty that is born of the senses, and that dies when the senses tire. It was such love as Michelangelo had known, as Montaigne, and Winckelmann and Shakespeare himself. Yes, Basil could have saved him. But it was too late now. The past could always be annihilated. Is it annihilated or it is annihilated? It can't be annihilated. Here is the point of this lecture where I'll stop and talk about a website called howjusay.com. I believe that pronunciation is a very important part of learning a language, and your pronunciation doesn't have to be perfect. Your pronunciation doesn't have to be exactly like a native speaker. You don't have to sound exactly American and try to sound like, oh, I was totally, totally rad, dude, and try to speak like what is cool, what is trendy at the moment. You have to have intelligible pronunciation that people will understand what you're saying. Let me write down the word. This website is called howjusay.com. Howjusay, H-W.
Annihilated.
Annihilated, so it was annihilated. HOWJSAY.com. You can be wrong about something. You can look at a word and think, oh, it can't be this. I looked at the two N's and I felt like it couldn't be it couldn't be, just because English has a lot of exceptions and not that many rules when it comes to pronunciation. So you can make a mistake. Native speakers can make a mistake. But you do have, and in 1993, I purchased a little dictionary that was an electronic dictionary. There was this very nice woman at this institute where I used to teach. She was an older lady who had traveled to America and bought this thing, and she was showing everyone how you could type the word and the dictionary would pronounce it for you, and you would learn how to pronounce the words. And I was just, oh, I have to have that. I was jealous when I saw that she had that. I wanted one for myself. So when I went to the United States later that year, I bought one for myself. And then I used to pronounce the words, type the words in, and it would pronounce the words for me. Nowadays, I still have it. It's broken somewhere around here, but I still have it. Nowadays, I just go to this website, www.howjusay.com. Howjusay, HOWJSAY. And the correct pronunciation for this word is
Annihilated.
come on. You can do better than this. Howjusay.com.
Annihilated.
Yeah, it's not doing a good job right now, but it's annihilated. And you can also learn how to read phonetically. A lot of dictionaries have the phonetic symbols where you can learn how to read. And people taking the course that I was talking about, Letras Inglês, will be studying this. But like I said, it is not a shameful thing to not know how a word is pronounced. You can make a mistake, but as long as your pronunciation is intelligible, that's the goal. Pronounce the words in a way that people will understand what you're saying. Your pronunciation has to be intelligible. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate or 100% like a native speaker. This website works a lot better when I'm not recording, because when you have several windows open, I have one window open to create this archive and one window open to create these. I want to use howjusay.com to pronounce the words. So when you have several windows open, it doesn't work very well. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can use this website to pronounce words for you. And if you don't have too many windows open and your computer is better than this old computer that I have, 2007, this computer was bought. Then you will definitely get a better experience from this website, howjustsay.com. You will get your words pronounced for you when you're not sure. But it was too late now. The past could always be annihilated. Regret, denial, or forgetfulness could do that. But the future was inevitable. There were passions in him that would find their terrible outlet, dreams that would make the shadow of their evil real. He took up from the couch the great purple and gold texture that covered it, and holding it in his hands, passed behind the screen. Was the face on the canvas viler than before? It seemed to him that it was unchanged, and yet its loathing of it was intensified. Gold hair, blue eyes, and rose-red lips, they were all there. It was simply the expression that had altered, that was horrible in its cruelty. Compared to what he saw in it of censure, and how shallow Basil's reproaches about Sybil Vane had been, how shallow, and of what little account! His own soul was looking out at him from the canvas and calling him to judgment. A look of pain came across him, and he flung the rich pall over the picture. As he did so, a knock came to the door. He passed out as his servant entered. "The persons are here, monsieur." He felt that the man must be got rid of at once. He must not be allowed to know where the picture was being taken to. There was something sly about him, and he had thoughtful, treacherous eyes. Sitting down at the writing table, he scribbled a note to Lord Harry, asking him to send him round something to read, and reminding him that they were to meet at 8:15 that evening. "Wait for an answer," he said, handing it to him, "and show the man in here." In 2 or 3 minutes there was another knock, and Mr. Hubbard himself, the celebrated frame maker of South Audley. Mr. Hubbard was a florid, red-whiskered little man whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate impecuniosity of most of the artists who dealt with him. As a rule, he never left his shop. He waited for people to come to him, but he always made an exception in favor of Dorian Gray. There was something about Dorian Gray that charmed everybody. It was a pleasure even to see him. "What can I do for you, Mr. Gray?" he said, rubbing his fat freckled hands. "I thought I would do myself the honor of coming round in person. I had just got a beauty of a frame. Picked it up on sale. Old Florentine. Came from Fonthill, I believe. Admirably suited for a religious subject, Mr. Gray. I am so sorry you have given yourself the trouble of coming around, Mr. Hubbard. I shall certainly drop in and look at the frame, though I don't go in much at present for religious art, but today I only want a picture carried to the top of the house for me. It is rather heavy, and I thought I would ask you to lend me a couple of your men." "No trouble at all, Mr. Gray. I am delighted to be of any service to you." "Which is the work of art, sir?" "This," replied Dorian, moving the screen back. "Can you move it, covering and all, just as it is? I don't want it to get scratched going upstairs." To be continued.